boxing has officially overtaken MMA as the number one combat sport on the planet. I think the change in power started around 2 years ago, I'd say. Because up until 2023, boxing was very stagnant. It wasn't going very anywhere. None of the fights were getting made. Tyson Fury was fighting Derek Chisora for the third fucking time. And the UFC were hitting it with bangers. The fight I was most invested in happened in 2023 in boxing or MMA ever. It was Israel Adesanya versus Alex Pereira 2. The lead up to that and the fight and the ending, I've never reacted more heavily to a result of a fight than that. That really was incredible. And coming off of UFC 287, which was when Izzy fought Pereira in the rematch, it felt like the UFC were just firing off of all cylinders. They were just going from strength to strength. And it seemed like boxing was getting left behind, really. It seemed like the UFC was really just in complete control. Only a few months later, however, Izzy loses in a really underwhelming performance. It was heartbreakingly shit. It was really a bad fucking performance from Izzy. And it was against a guy that doesn't move the needle. He's not exciting. Some people find him funny, but he talks well. Kinda well. Sean Strickland, the way he fights is so fucking mundane. I don't appreciate it really. I don't have an appreciation for it. I do respect him for beating Izzy, because that was insane. The odds were ridiculously, he was a massive underdog, and he beat Izzy in Australia in 297, UFC 297. So that was a big deal, but that was a real blow to the UFC at that point, because Izzy could have been the biggest star they've ever had. He could have gotten to that stage, because he's such a character. And apart from those two things happening in 2023 for the UFC, I think those are the two main things, really, in my opinion. There's other moments, but I don't think they match up. And in boxing in 2023, there was a lot. It was a very solid year when you look at it. They had Tank versus Ryan. They had the Eubank Jr. versus Liam Smith. Eubank Jr. versus Liam Smith rivalry. You had Usyk versus Daniel Dubois. You had Caleb Plant versus David Benavidez. These are all great fights that happened in 2023. So it was a pretty solid year. I would still say the UFC, towards the end of the year, you would still give it to the UFC in terms of competition, because I think the biggest moment in the year was Izzy Pereira 2. I don't think anything could touch that. But towards the end of the year, Saudi stepped in, and this was the first time properly where Saudi was, because they'd done a few ones before, like Jake Paul and Tommy Fury. No one really took that seriously, because why would you? It was pish. It was fucking sucked. I don't understand. Don't get me started, it sucked. And Francis Ngannou walks in there, debut, and drops the champion, the heavyweight champion of the world in Tyson Fury. That was October. I think it was later on in October in 2023. That was an amazing fight, and Fabio Wardley was the co-main, and he was really starting to pick up traction after that. That was one of Fabio's breakout fights, was him knocking out David Adderley. It was a great performance as well. But Francis embarrassing Tyson Fury turned the world on its head in the boxing scene. It was unbelievable what he did. Walking out with the other two kings as well, Izzy and Kamaru, I will never forget that. And then they ended the year 2023 with AJ and Wallen and the co-main Deontay versus Joseph Parker. It was one of AJ's best performances, and I feel like it really set the tone for what was to come, because the UFC had just lost their biggest star, and boxing had started to rack up momentum with all these different fighters and all these different shows that they had started to put on quite close together in the space of 2 months. So when we headed into 2024, boxing continued the momentum of just event after event, champion versus champion all the time, just constant. It was very just keep it going. And the UFC still, I think they were plateauing at that stage, because I think they were just plateauing. Blech, cut that. the year kicked off with AJ sparking Francis Ngannou in 2 rounds. I think there was 4 knockdowns in 2 rounds. It was the most brutal performance I've ever seen AJ have. I've never seen Francis hurt like that before. And especially what Tyson Fury failed to do to Francis and what Francis did to him, that was just incredible. I think AJ took one left hook in the whole fight, and that was about it, a couple jabs. But he was insane. AJ was amazing, and it was a real message to the rest of the heavyweight division that AJ was not the same guy. He was a new level of just intensity, and his training with Ben Davison seemed to be really paying off. Because a lot of people doubted his change in camp, because people had this narrative that he would swap camps all the time because he just was hard to coach or something. I forgot what they said. It was a bunch of nonsense. I think AJ swapping to Ben Davison has shown to be a good move overall. He then moved on later on in March to this wasn't a big show, but it was probably one of the best fights in either sport, was Fabio Wardley versus Fraser Clark. That was at the end of March. And that was one of my favourite fights. Fabio Wardley is he should be everyone's favourite fighter. Like, he's just incredible. He's different gravy, man. And then in May, a few months later in May, we have the first undisputed heavyweight champion in 25 years in Usyk. When Usyk finally got his hands on Fury and pasted him. like fucking just got him. It was so brilliant. He's amazing, Usyk. And that event was that's such a big moment, because we haven't had that in 2.5 decades. We hadn't had a proper champion. So it was such a big deal. And the UFC are still... Yeah. It was a big deal as well to boxing for Usyk to win, because it got rid of Fury as the champion. Because he was fighting Chisora for the third fucking time, charging the record pay-per-view price of the UK's of British boxing pay-per-view history. The most expensive event was Chisora versus Fury 3. It's bullshit. Like, the guy was a terrible champion in my opinion. He fought Dillon, which is a decent defense. He could have fought Usyk before Dillon. He could have fought Usyk when he was in his prime, but he had to wait until both of them were out of it, and when he was getting paid a monstrous amount of money. It's the only reason he took the fight. But at least we had Usyk as the champion, and Fury wasn't. So Fury had zero leverage, which was very, very good for the sport. Because Fury was slowing everything down, the whole division. And once you slow the heavyweight division down, it makes it really difficult for the rest of the divisions, because the attention isn't as high. So it damaged the whole sport, what Fury was doing. It reminds me of what Floyd Mayweather did, of picking and choosing when to fight the opponents that he fought. We then moved on to the 5v5 between Eddie Hearn and Frank Warren, and I thought Eddie Hearn's promotion of that event was what made me excited, really, because he seemed really up for it, and it was a fresh idea, and I hope they go back to it. I hear they are going to go back to it. I'm very excited for that. That'll be really cool. I heard some things about Eddie Hearn versus Golden Boy, Matchroom versus Golden Boy, which would be really cool, but I'd rather the rematch with Frank, but we'll see. And then in August you had Bud Crawford becoming a 4-weight world champion against Madrimov, who's a really solid fighter. I know he lost to Ortiz, but I think he's a really solid opponent. He's a hard guy to fight. Like, he's just annoying. He doesn't make anyone look really particularly good. I've seen some people say Ortiz didn't look good. I think he was very good. I think he was very on. It's just Madrimov's just really awkward. That's why I think Bud got touched so often. He got hit so often in that fight, because he had to make it a fight. Because this whole boxing thing with Madrimov, it just makes everything suck. It's just not a fun thing to do. So he had to make the exchanges happen, which I really rate, because he was going up in weight and he was fighting the champion who was undefeated and younger than him, and he made him fight. And Madrimov didn't want to fight because Bud's about that. Bud's crazy. Even just a month later, you had AJ versus Dubois in the biggest British boxing event in history. It was like 100,000 in Wembley. It's ridiculous. They had to apply for extra capacity. It was not only that, it was probably one of the biggest upsets in British boxing history as well. I had no idea that was going to happen. I don't think anyone really did. Dubois was just on smoke that night. It was ridiculous. AJ's fucking class, and he just got broken. It was mental. And then we had the start, a few months later after that, in October, we had the start of the rivalry between Beterbiev and Bivol. I love watching them fight. Beterbiev having the more consistent work and nicking the last couple rounds, but I think Bivol in the first fight showed a higher ceiling of skill. He just didn't work like consistently enough, or even like you can do the whole like sprint thing of like resting and then going into action, but I think it needed to be more often than what he did, and that's what he said after the fight. He needed to work more, but that fight was just one of the best fights I've ever seen. It was so smart. Both of them are so smart. They're amazing at what they do. And we ended up closing 2024 with Usyk smashing Fury this time. He beat him down. Fury didn't want to be in there. He went in there to survive and get another payday. Usyk, like, he just manhandled him again. It was beautiful. He solidified himself as the greatest of this generation. I don't think anyone could argue with that at all. Any of them. I think Usyk was just... And not only has he solidified himself as the greatest of this generation, he's thrown his hat into being the greatest ever. Because you can't ask him to do any more. There's nothing he hasn't done. Two-weight undisputed, gold medalist, undefeated, fought everyone in their prime in their home country as well. Went around the world. He's incredible. He's an absolute man. He never left his original promoter either. He started with his Ukrainian guy and he's ended with him. Like, he's just... I really rate what Usyk's done. He's an incredible man. And when you look at the 2024 that the UFC had, they had some really big moments, such as UFC 300 was massive. That was incredible. That was a fantastic thing that they did in there. You had Izzy Dreykus, which was one of my favourite lead-ups. The fight was incredible as well. I wanted Izzy to win, but Dreykus is a hard bastard, man. That was amazing to watch. You also had Max Holloway versus Ilya, which was probably my favourite matchup of 2024. Maybe including boxing, because that was just unreal. I loved Ilya versus Max. It was so intriguing, it was so interesting, and the way that Ilya won was fantastic, because Max was starting to gain traction and Ilya just put him to sleep. It was ridiculous. We also had Alex... No. But when you look at both of the year that they had, boxing was so much more consistent, and they had, like, UFC 300 is a massive moment, but it's only massive because it's how long the company's been making fights. Whether it's boxing, there was like records broken and history was made, like Usyk beating Fury again, or Bud becoming 4-weight world champion, or the biggest show in British history, sort of thing. Like, there was legacy stuff happening in 2024. In the UFC, was just more about the UFC and what the company's done. I don't think you can really compare the two. I don't think it's comparable at all. And you go into 2025 and they continue this with Bivol having one of the most amazing performances I've ever seen in my life in this year against Beterbiev, making it 1-1 between them. Much more dominant display than Beterbiev had against Bivol when he won in the first fight. And then you look at the horizon, and Usyk's probably going to fight either Daniel or Joseph Parker, which is... I'm not complaining about that at all. They're both... That's just an amazing fight. And then you've also got Canelo Bud. I don't even understand what's going to happen there. I can't wait. I'm going to do a breakdown of that properly later on. And then you look at the UFC's biggest possible fight, and it's Tom Aspinall versus John Jones, which should have happened 2 years ago, or a year ago. But he's sitting there fighting Stipe and acting like he needs another 6 months after he just fought 4 months ago. It's a piss take. And the UFC is so stagnant, and it's because this is what these champions do. Tyson Fury and Floyd Mayweather did this to boxing. It made it so stale, and this is what John Jones is actually starting to do with the UFC now. It's really damaging to the sport, and I don't think you can compare the two right now. I don't know how long it's going to last, because you saw how quick. That's the span of 2 years, and the UFC's getting smashed by boxing all of a sudden when they were on top for so long. I don't know how long it's going to last, but right now, John Jones is killing, it's suffocating what the UFC could be doing right now. And also, I don't know how long these Saudi guys are going to be doing shit in boxing, but for as long as it lasts, I think we're going to see every fight that we could possibly want to see. So yeah, this is my new channel. I love boxing, I love UFC. I love Izzy. I love Usyk. Just want to talk about. If you liked it, subscribe. I'll see you guys later.